The fallout from this Trump signal, secret war plans, group chat scandal just keeps getting crazier and crazier. Which if you missed yesterday's show, a quick 20-second recap. It appears that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz accidentally added The Atlantic's editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg to a signal group chat where the vice president and top cabinet officials discuss Yemen war plans in fine detail, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly texting precise information about weapons packages, targets, and timing. And you've got legal experts saying the whole thing, it could constitute violations of the Espionage Act and the Federal Records Act, not to mention a breach of national security. And it's not only because Goldberg was added to the chat, but because the chat existed in the first place. Right? Classified materials are not supposed to be on private messaging platforms like Signal. And so in the wake of all this, everyone involved has been absolutely ridiculed for what's widely being slammed as egregious incompetence and carelessness. With seeing, for example, Jon Stewart taking a stab at the news on his show yesterday.
You know, back in my day, if you were a journalist who wanted leaked war documents, you'd work the sources, meet them in a dark garage, earn the trust, pound the pavement. Now, you just wait for the National Security Advisor to be distracted by White Lotus while he's setting up his bomb Yemen group chat.
But there's also saying Hillary Clinton herself, who you might remember Donald Trump wanted to put in jail for her use of a private email server as Secretary of State, reacting to the news with, "You have got to be kidding me." Though to be very clear here, it was not just Trump who called for her to be charged. Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, and John Ratcliffe, all of whom were in the Signal chat, did the same, with CNN even putting together a compilation of their past comments that have gone viral.
If there was anyone other than Hillary Clinton, they would be in jail right now.
Nobody is above the law, not even Hillary Clinton, even though she thinks she is.
Mishandling classified information is still a violation of the Espionage Act.
When you have the Clinton emails, on top of the fact that the sitting president of the United States admitted he had documents in his garage, they didn't prosecute, they didn't go after these folks.
But also, if these people aren't going to be charged with crimes, at the very least, you have many critics calling for those officials to resign. With us seeing here, top Democrats on the House Armed Services, Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, and Oversight Committees all writing a letter to the White House demanding transparency, and specifically about any other instances in which senior officials discuss national security issues on unauthorized messaging platforms. Now also, with all this, after claiming that I knew nothing about the Signal chat and attacking The Atlantic yesterday, Trump apparently debriefed himself on the story because he later responded, telling NBC News, "Mike Waltz has learned a lesson and he's a good man." And then when asked how Goldberg got added to the chat, he said it was one of Michael's people on the phone. A staffer had his number on there, with Trump then expressing confidence in his team and saying he was not frustrated by the events leading up to the Atlantic story, and claiming it was, quote, the only glitch in 2 months, and it turned out not to be a serious one. And then this afternoon, Trump spoke at a press conference claiming there were no classified materials in the chat, smearing the Atlantic and Goldberg, and arguing that Signal is commonly used in the government.
If it was up to me, everybody would be sitting in a room together. The room would have solid lead walls and a lead ceiling and a lead floor. But, you know, life doesn't always let you do that. We always want to use the best technology. This was the best technology for the moment.
With also House Speaker Mike Johnson downplaying the severity of the mistake at a news briefing.
They've acknowledged that there was an error and they're correct in it. And I would have asked the same thing of the Biden administration. I don't think anyone should have lost their job over that because an errant number, found its way onto a dialogue between leaders.
But then interestingly, if the response from the president was kind of, no biggie, the immediate reaction from other officials has been outright denial. With, for example, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claiming that war plans were not discussed and, quote, no classified material was sent to the thread. With us also seeing Pete Hegseth calling Goldberg a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes and then saying,
Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
But to be very clear, the National Security Council has confirmed the authenticity of the Signal chat, so it's unclear whether he's nitpicking the term war plans or just flatly denying reality. But either way, you had Goldberg responding to that clip on MSNBC.
By the standard vernacular understanding of what war plan means, it was, at 1:45, this is going to happen. At 1:52, this is going to happen. Then this happens. Then that happens. And then we do this. And then we do that. He's telling this group. He's letting them know probably more than they need to know. I mean, the Secretary of State, the Chief of Staff of the White House don't actually need to know which weapons packages are being deployed in what way.
And so with one side saying one thing and one side saying another, a lot of people are like, hey, why don't you just settle this by releasing the full text? But notably, in an interview this morning with The Bulwark, Goldberg said that while it's possible that he comes up with a plan to publicly vet the messages in the coming days, right now, it appears he's just discussing how to handle it with his lawyers and colleagues, explaining.
Just because they're irresponsible with material doesn't mean that I'm going to be irresponsible
with this material.
Right, and then this factual dispute was taken straight to the halls of Congress because this morning, the Senate Intelligence Committee held a previously scheduled annual hearing where intelligence officials usually just present their assessment of the global threats facing the United States. But this time, right, with the breaking news, you had Democratic lawmakers using it as an opportunity to force two of the people reportedly in the Signal chat, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, to answer for the scandal. With, for example, Senator Mark Warner grilling Gabbard about one simple question: were you in the group chat or not?
Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not. Are you denying? Ma'am, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat.
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat.
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security Council.
Because it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then if there was no classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security.
We then saw him jump on Ratcliffe, the CIA director, who had no problem telling Warner that he was a member of the group chat, but then he went on to defend it, saying,
So that we're clear, one of the first things that happened when I was confirmed as CIA director was Signal was loaded onto my computer at the CIA, as it is for most CIA officers. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
Director Ratcliffe, I understand encryption.
It is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels. So my communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
We also saw Ratcliffe taking a beating from Senator Michael Bennet.
Did you know that the president's Middle East advisor was in Moscow on this thread while you were, as director of the CIA, participating in this thread? Were you aware of that? Are you aware of that today?
I'm not aware of that today.
It's an embarrassment.
Senator,
you need to do better.
You also notably had Gabbard seemingly denying that detailed war plans would be classified at all.
So
the attack sequencing and timing and weapons and targets you don't consider should have been classified?
I defer to the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Council on that question.
Well, you're the head of the intelligence community. You're supposed to know about classifications.
So also, at another point, both of them deny not only that the information was classified, but that it wasn't even sent at all.
Did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Director Gabbard, same question.
Same answer, and defer to the Department of Defense on that question.
Well, those are two different answers.
And so with all this, you had John Ossoff just asking Ratcliffe straight up.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
And, right now, it's looking like this is far from the end of the story, especially since both Gabbard and Ratcliffe said that they are open to being audited for other private message conversations. And this is, Democrats are chomping at the bit for any shred of accountability here with, for example, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying,
I am calling for a bipartisan investigation in the Senate of this mishandling. I am also calling for the defense IG to fully investigate.
But also, another big aspect of this is that it's looking like the use of Signal and other encrypted messaging apps in the federal government, they're actually more the rule than the exception. Right? And that, in part, because more than 24 government workers told the Washington Post that federal bureaucrats have migrated to Signal en masse since Trump took office because it allows them to talk to each other without being scrutinized by higher-ups. With reportedly one fired worker from the U.S. Digital Service who is in 8 private Signal groups with current and former federal employees, putting it bluntly, saying, I'm not sure there is any government worker right now who isn't talking to their colleagues on signal. As well as others saying they worry their digital water cooler talk or questions about agency layoffs, return to office mandates, and administration policies could be perceived as disloyal. Right, so in an administration where employees feel like they can't speak freely for fear of losing their jobs, secrecy has become a valuable currency, not just at the top, but at the bottom as well. Though, to be very clear here, rank and file workers privately discussing their employment or whether to respond to "what did you do last week" emails, that is massively different, completely different ballpark than what Trump's cabinet has been accused of both practically and legally. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple. No coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.